In the heart of nature, where beauty intertwines with danger, ordinary people find themselves facing extraordinary challenges. This collection of gripping tales reveals the harrowing encounters between humans and wildlife, showcasing the raw power of nature and the instinct to survive. What unfolds when the tranquility of the wilderness is shattered by a life-threatening encounter? Join us as we delve into these chilling accounts that will forever change your perspective on the wild and the risks that come with exploring its depths. Natalia and Sergei had been together for 7 years. They shared many passions, exploring the outdoors being only one of them. They had come to Sakhalin Island, Russia, hoping to find peace in untouched forests, far from the distractions of their busy lives back in Moscow. Sergei, a former military officer turned office worker, was a seasoned outdoorsman, while Natalia, a high school teacher, had always been drawn to the untouched corners of their country. But their shared love for the outdoors was about to be tested in the harshest way imaginable. The trail they had chosen wound through dense woods, and thick underbrush obscured most of the path. It was a pleasant late afternoon, filled with the gentle sounds of the forest. The sun had just begun to dip behind the horizon when the unexpected happened. Neither of them heard the bear coming. The Russian grizzly was a superb creature, muscular, its fur a mix of brown and golden hues, blending almost seamlessly with the environment. Its eyes locked onto the couple, narrowing as it sized them up, its senses alert to every movement. Startled by the sudden presence of humans, the bear's instinct kicked in, and without warning, it charged. Sergei tried to step back, but his body moved too slowly. The bear hurtled toward them, getting increasingly closer by the second. Sergei stumbled and fell, his body crashing into the dirt. His heart raced as panic gripped him. He had never imagined that a bear could be this fast or this close to him. Natalia instinctively threw herself forward, pushing Sergei hard to the side. It was a split-second decision, driven by sheer adrenaline and the deep love she felt for him. As Sergei tumbled away, he saw her turn toward the charging beast, her body trembling but her mind set. She didn't hesitate. She was already positioning herself between Sergei and the bear, a useless but brave effort to protect the man she loved. The grizzly's jaws were wide, its teeth bared in a snarl that seemed to echo through the forest. In an instant, it was on her. Natalia's scream was drowned out by the bear's roar as it struck, its claws raking through her coat and tearing into her body. She desperately tried to shield herself from the animal's savage blows. Her hands reached out, attempting to push the beast back, but it was too strong, too fast. It pinned her beneath its body, each swipe of its claws carving deeper into her. Sergei, still confused from his own fall, scrambled to his feet. His vision was blurry, his legs unsteady, but he could hear Natalia's cries. He was paralyzed for a moment, frozen by the sheer horror of what was unfolding. The sound of her struggle, the thudding of the bear's strikes, pierced through his shock, pushing him to move. He lurched toward her, reaching out with trembling arms, but the bear was too fast. Sergei's own body was battered and bruised, but he had to save his wife. With his breath ragged and his heart pounding, Sergei forced himself to stand, barely able to keep his balance as he staggered away from the chaos. He could hear the crushing sounds of Natalia's body being torn apart by the bear's attack. His mind screamed at him to go back, to do something, anything. But his legs wouldn't cooperate. His body betrayed him. The instinct to run, to survive, overtook him. As the bear continued its savage assault, Natalia lay helpless against the power of the beast. Her body was racked with pain, but she kept her hands pressed against the ground, her fingers desperate to push the beast away. The bear's teeth sank deeper, and her strength waned with each passing moment, her thoughts flickering between memories of happier days and the harsh reality of the present. She had no chance to escape. All she could do was protect Sergei with whatever strength she had left. Meanwhile, Sergei stumbled, gasping for air, his heart in his throat. He turned once more, his mind begging him to go back, but his body found it impossible. His hands shook violently as he clutched at the trees, desperation building inside him. He had to at least get her help. He had to survive. He was no hero. Not like her. His legs, heavy with the weight of guilt, carried him forward as he finally found his footing, each step pushing him further from the horror behind him. With every ounce of his remaining strength, Sergei ran. His mind was in a haze, his body burning with exhaustion and fear, but he pushed on. He had to find help. He had to live to tell the tale, to make sure Natalia's bravery would not be forgotten. Hours later, Sergei collapsed into the arms of rescuers who had been alerted by his frantic calls. His clothes were torn, but it was the look in his eyes that haunted them. The memory of the forest, of the bear, and of the woman who had given her life for him was too much for him to bear alone. The authorities arrived soon after, scouring the forest for the beast. They found the bear a few miles away, resting in the underbrush. The bear was killed on sight, a grim necessity to ensure no further attacks. Natalia's body was recovered after the threat was neutralized. Her bravery was never in question, though the pain of her loss tore through Sergei's soul like an unrelenting storm. She had died as she lived, with courage, with love, and with a selflessness that would forever define her. In the wake of the attack, Sergei was left to wrestle with the guilt that consumed him, the pain of knowing that Natalia had given everything for him. He would never forget the way she had thrown herself between him and the bear, her final act of love etched into his memory forever. At 36, Lucy was a mother of two, and hiking had become a treasured way to spend time with her children, 8-year-old Emma and 5-year-old Jack. The fresh air and green beauty of British Columbia's wilderness offered her a chance to teach her kids about nature. The children's laughter echoed through the trees as they explored the area around their mother, their small voices bouncing off the forest's tall trunks. Lucy's heart swelled with affection as she watched Emma carefully balance on a fallen log while Jack picked up rocks, pretending they were treasure. She loved these moments. The woods were peaceful, but also vast and wild, the kind of place one could easily get lost in. Lucy knew to keep her children close. They had been hiking for a little over an hour, the path winding through thick groves of cedar and spruce, when they came across a berry patch at the edge of the forest. Lucy made sure the berries were edible, then let the children take a break and enjoy the wild blueberries scattered across the ground. After the break, she planned to start the hike back to their car, but they never got to. Emma and Jack eagerly picked the fruit, their faces covered in smudges of blue and purple. Lucy smiled as she scanned the trees around them, always aware of the dangers of the wild. The park's warning signs had been clear. Black bears were known to roam the area, especially in the late summer when food was plentiful. Still, she never expected to encounter one so close. All of a sudden, Lucy stiffened, her instincts kicking in. She didn't know what had made her skin prickle, but it felt like an ancient kind of fear. She turned, scanning the surroundings. Her breath caught when she spotted the black bear, not large, but imposing, moving slowly toward the patch of berries not far from where they stood. It was only a few yards away, its black fur gleaming in the dim light of the overcast sky. The bear, drawn by the scent of the ripening fruit, was unbothered by their presence at first. But after a short while, it turned its head and saw them standing there. The creature froze, its dark eyes locking onto theirs. Lucy's heart hammered in her chest, and she immediately took a step back, positioning herself between the bear and her children without hesitation. Emma and Jack, oblivious to the danger at first, stood frozen beside her, their eyes wide as they noticed the bear for the first time. They were scared, but also a little curious, not yet fully aware of the peril they were in. Lucy's mind raced, looking for a way out of the situation. Without warning, the bear moved. It was only a small step, but Lucy let out a scream nevertheless. It was then that the bear charged. She threw herself in front of her children, her arms outstretched, hoping to shield them. Her heart pounded in her chest as the bear's massive form surged forward, its jaws snapping open wide and its claws extended, ready to strike. The bear's weight collided with Lucy, knocking her to the ground with a force that stole her breath. The children scattered. Lucy tried to push herself up to get between the children and the bear, but it was too fast. The animal's claws raked across her chest and back. Lucy gasped, pain radiating from her body as the bear's massive paws swiped at her, each strike sending shockwaves of agony through her. She screamed, not for herself, but for her children, desperate for them to run, to escape. Emma and Jack's terrified screams rang in Lucy's ears, their tiny hands clasped together. Lucy could feel her strength waning with every blow. Her head spun, blood dripping from her wounds, her arms weakening as she tried to protect herself with whatever little energy she had left. In the distance, Lucy could hear something else, someone shouting, followed by the sound of rocks clattering against the ground. A figure appeared on the edge of the clearing, a hiker, seeing the commotion and rushing to help. The man, his face tight with determination, scooped up rocks and began throwing them at the bear. His shouts echoed through the trees, loud and urgent, as he attempted to drive the animal away. Lucy, gasping for breath, managed to shift her body just enough to make eye contact with Emma and Jack, who were still frozen in place, their faces pale and filled with horror. The bear turned away from Lucy and advanced toward the hiker. With another loud roar, it charged at him, but the man did not falter. He kept up the barrage of rocks and loud shouts, and the bear, sensing a greater threat, retreated quickly, disappearing from view. Lucy's labored breathing broke the silence. The hiker quickly moved toward her. He immediately began checking her wounds, his hands trembling as he applied pressure to stop the bleeding. He told her help was on the way, that he had already called for rescue. But Lucy's vision was blurry, and she could barely stay conscious. The children remained huddled nearby, too scared to move. Emma clung to Jack, her small hands trembling as she whispered to him, trying to comfort him, though she was just as terrified. The trauma of the attack would stay with them for a long time. Soon, the sound of a helicopter filled the air. Rescuers arrived, bringing with them medical supplies and more people to help. They carefully lifted Lucy onto a stretcher and airlifted her to the nearest hospital. She was barely conscious, but through the haze of pain and fear, she managed to hold on to the thought that her children were safe. Lucy's recovery would be long and painful, but her injuries, though critical, were not fatal. Yet the scars from that day would never fade, on her body, in her mind, and in the hearts of Emma and Jack, who would carry the weight of that moment forever. Igor Kuznetsov and his companion Alexei were both experienced hikers in their mid-30s, well accustomed to the remote trails of Russia's wilderness. Today they found themselves on the rugged island of Iturup, part of the Kuril Islands in the Far East, where the mountains met the sea. The two men had been trekking for hours, their destination a secluded river deep in the forest, a place few ever visited. Igor, a quiet but confident man, led the way. He was the more methodical of the two, always thinking ahead and planning each step with precision. Alexei, on the other hand, was a bit more spontaneous, enjoying the thrill of the unknown. Despite their differences, the two worked in sync, relying on each other's strengths. They had weathered countless trips together, but today would test them in ways they never anticipated. The river, fast-flowing and icy from the snowmelt higher up in the mountains, came into view as they neared the clearing. The water was dangerously high, swollen from recent rains, and its current rushed with a deafening roar. They decided to cross it to continue their trek. Igor, always cautious, scanned the water's edge, looking for a safer place to wade through. Alexei followed closely behind, his pack weighing heavily on his back, but his eyes focused on the challenge ahead. As they moved closer to the river, the noise of the water became overwhelming, and neither man noticed the shadow that moved quietly through the forest, stalking them from the trees. The Russian grizzly bear had been watching them from a distance. Territorial and hungry, the bear had been on edge for days, struggling to find enough food. The scent of the two men, their sweat mixing with the aroma of food in their packs, had drawn the bear closer. When they stepped into the water, the sudden noise startled the creature. It panicked, and then it charged. The grizzly was upon Igor in an instant, its massive claws slashing through the air and catching the man in the chest as it barreled into him. He cried out, instinctively trying to shield himself with his arms. The current of the river swept him off his feet. Alexei froze, his heart pounding in his chest as the bear bore down on Igor. The bear's jaws snapped shut around Igor's shoulder, dragging him further into the rushing water. The roar of the river was drowned out by the deafening sound of the bear's growls and the desperate thrashing of Igor's body. His backpack, too heavy for him to control, was ripped off as the bear dragged him beneath the water. Alexei, paralyzed with fear and shock, was unable to act. His body felt frozen, every part of him screaming to help. But the horror unfolding before him was too much. Alexei screamed, his voice barely carrying over the roar of the river. The bear, its eyes wide and furious, continued to maul Igor with ferocious strength. Igor's body was tossed about like a rag doll, helpless against the power of the animal's assault. The bear's massive claws raked across Igor's body, tearing through his clothes and skin, dragging him further under the surface. The river seemed like a death trap, rushing with enough power to sweep anything away. Alexei's stomach churned as he watched, the helplessness of the situation weighing heavily on him. He considered running for help, but the thought of leaving Igor in the clutches of the bear was unbearable. His only option was to continue yelling, to do anything that might distract the animal. He picked up a rock and threw it at the bear with all his might, but it was useless. The bear barely flinched. It was too focused on its prey. Igor's body weakened with every pull of the bear's claws. His cries were drowned out by the sound of the river, the grizzly's growls, and the rush of water that swept around them. Finally, the bear let go of Igor, only for the current to seize him, dragging him further downstream. For a moment, everything was still. The bear backed away, its head low as it watched Alexei from a distance, still growling and warning. The animal lingered for a few seconds before retreating into the thick woods, leaving the scene behind. Alexei's heart pounded in his chest, his breathing erratic as he scrambled toward the water's edge, his mind racing in disbelief. He had lost Igor, his friend, his hiking companion. Alexei's legs finally gave way as he fell to his knees at the edge of the river. Tears blurred his vision, but he didn't have time to mourn yet. His first priority was to make sure Igor's body would get back to his elderly mother. He sprinted back toward the trail, calling out as loudly as he could, hoping someone, anyone, would hear him. Hours later, the sound of helicopters filled the air as the rescuers scoured the riverbank, following the current downstream. They found Igor's lifeless body caught among the rocks, battered and broken by the violent encounter with the bear and the ruthless current. The investigators later determined that the bear's attack was likely driven by hunger and territorial instincts. In a place like this, where food was scarce and the animals fought to survive, any disturbance could trigger a violent reaction. The bear's aggression had been a deadly response to a perceived threat, and by the time it had taken Igor, there was nothing anyone could have done. The loss hit Alexei hard. He had witnessed the death of his friend and could not erase the image of Igor's final moments, dragged helplessly beneath the river's surface. Liam Jensen and his friends had been looking forward to this camping trip for months. The 17-year-old from Australia had always been drawn to adventure, and this trip to the Carpathian Mountains in Slovakia was the kind of experience he craved. Along with his 3 friends, Jared, Mia, and Lucas, Liam had flown from home, arrived in the European country, and started their adventure through dense forest. On the second day of their trip, they followed a narrow trail that led them to a quiet, secluded area near a stream. They set up camp by the water, surrounded by pines that swayed gently in the wind. The group had been prepared for the wild. After all, the Carpathians were known for their rugged terrain and dense forests, but they were unaware of the dangers that lurked in the shadows. As the friends set up their campfire, laughter filled the air, and the smell of their meal drifted into the cool evening breeze. It was the kind of peaceful night that everyone hoped for when camping in the wild. But unknown to them, their dinner was attracting more than just the usual forest critters. Liam, always the optimist, was too caught up in the moment to think much of the sounds in the distance. The snap of branches, the rustle of leaves. He had just finished preparing a pot of stew when he noticed the others growing tenser. Mia, who had been stirring the fire, glanced nervously around the campsite. Lucas, normally the jokester, was now scanning the tree line with a concerned expression. Jared, who had been sharpening a knife, lowered it slowly and peered into the trees. At first, Liam thought it was just their imaginations running wild. The Carpathian wilderness had a way of making even the most experienced campers feel uneasy. But then a rustling sound grew louder, and Liam's heart skipped a beat. His eyes snapped to the dense underbrush where shadows shifted and moved. Something was out there, and it wasn't a deer. No, it was a brown bear, the first one any of them had ever seen. Its fur hung in patches, and its bones were visible beneath its thin skin. The bear's eyes locked onto the campfire, the smell of food clearly overwhelming its senses. The animal was emaciated, its body gaunt from the lack of food after a difficult berry season. Starving and desperate, it had found the group's campsite. Liam's stomach twisted as the bear took a few hesitant steps forward. The others froze, their eyes wide with fear. Jared's voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the air. His hand instinctively reached for the flare gun in his pack. Mia, shaking, grabbed her phone, the bright screen illuminating her frightened face as she fumbled with the emergency call function. The bear continued to advance, its eyes fixated on the food. It was clear that it wasn't afraid. It wasn't interested in the campers as much as it was in survival. Liam's mind raced. He wanted to tell the others to just retreat for the moment and come back after the bear was done eating their food. But he never got the chance. The next second, the bear was near Liam. It roared in his face and struck his abdomen with its claws. Liam gasped, his breath catching in his throat as the bear's teeth sank into his shoulder. He tried to push the bear away, but his arms were weak with shock. He collapsed to the ground, pinned under the bear's weight. He could do nothing but struggle in a desperate attempt to free himself. The pain in his chest and abdomen was excruciating, and blood quickly stained the dirt beneath him as the bear's claws shredded his body. The screams of his friends echoed through the clearing, their voices high-pitched and frantic. Jared had the flare gun in his hand, but his fingers trembled so violently that he could barely aim it. Mia and Lucas were throwing rocks, trying to create noise, but none of it seemed to faze the bear. Its attention was solely on Liam, whose body was limp beneath its crushing weight. Each swipe of its paw sent waves of pain through Liam's body, and he could feel his strength slipping away. Jared finally managed to fire the flare gun, the loud pop of the explosion ringing in the air. The bright, fiery light shot up into the sky, creating a blinding display. The bear released Liam with a grunt, dragging itself away. Its eyes never left the campers as it slowly retreated into the trees. Liam lay still, his breath shallow and ragged. His friends rushed to him, their hands trembling as they tried to stop the bleeding. But there was so much blood pouring from the deep wounds on his chest, and his legs were bent at unnatural angles from the bear's assault. Mia was on the phone with emergency services, her voice a whisper of panic as she tried to explain their location. But they knew help was too far away. The nearest rescue teams were hours from reaching them, and the forest was dense and difficult to navigate. Liam's vision darkened as he tried to stay awake, but the blood loss was overwhelming. The last thing he saw before his body gave way to unconsciousness was the silhouette of his friends, their faces twisted in grief and terror. They were too late to help him. The bear's attack had been swift, and now it was too late for Liam. By the time the rescue teams arrived hours later, the campsite was eerily quiet. The bear had long since disappeared into the wild, but the damage had been done. Liam Jensen, the young adventurer from Australia, had succumbed to the savage attack of the desperate creature. His friends, forever marked by the horrific experience, would never forget the sight of the bear and the brutal reality of nature's unforgiving hand. Investigators later attributed the bear's behavior to its hunger, aggravated by the lack of food during a particularly hard berry season. The bear, hungry and disoriented, had been willing to do anything to survive, even if it meant attacking humans. In the end, it was a tragedy born not from malice, but from desperation, a sad reminder of the harshness of the wilderness. Matt O'Connor had always been at home in the wilderness of Kodiak Island, Alaska, where he had spent most of his life hunting and navigating the dense forests. His experience as a hunter was unmatched, and at 48 years old, he had tracked deer in these wilds for years without incident. Today, however, would prove to be a different kind of challenge, one he wasn't prepared for. The day had started like any other. He had risen early, the sky still dark as he loaded his rifle and packed his gear. The air was thick with the scent of pine and earth, and the cold morning mist clung to his clothes as he made his way into the deep woods. With his senses sharp, Matt had already spotted a few tracks from a deer he was tracking. His breath puffed in front of him as he moved silently, following the trail along a narrow game path. But the deeper he went, the more the wilderness around him felt alive, as though it was watching, waiting. Hours passed with little more than the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. He was on high alert. His instincts were honed from years of hunting, and today he felt particularly attuned to his surroundings. Then, as he rounded a bend, the unmistakable scent of something dead hit his nostrils. It was overpowering, the scent of decay lingering in the air. His mind immediately shifted into a new mode of caution. A dead animal meant a predator might not be far behind. Matt approached cautiously, the rifle heavy in his hands. His heart began to race as he crept closer to the source of the smell. There, lying on the ground near the brush, was a carcass, a deer, its hide torn and flesh partially eaten. But what caught Matt's attention wasn't the kill itself. It was the large shape just beyond it. A massive Kodiak bear, the kind Matt had encountered only a couple of times in his life, was feeding on the carcass. It was a powerful creature, its enormous frame dwarfing anything Matt had ever seen in the woods. His first instinct was to back away slowly and retreat. Kodiak bears were dangerous, especially when they were feeding or surprised. But as he began to move, the bear seemed to sense him. It turned its head. The bear didn't make a sound. It simply stood there, its powerful muscles rippling beneath its fur as it slowly rose to its full height. A surge of panic coursed through Matt's veins. He had no time to react as the bear charged at him, its weight sending the ground trembling beneath his feet. The world seemed to move in slow motion as the bear's enormous paws hit the earth just feet from him. In an instant, Matt was on the ground, his rifle flying from his hands as the bear collided with him, its claws raking through his clothing and into his flesh. The impact was brutal, and the force of the bear's charge knocked the wind from Matt's chest. The beast's hot breath was on his face, its massive teeth bared as it snarled. Matt struggled beneath the weight of the animal, his body pinned under its massive paws. Every movement he made seemed to trigger more pain. His ribs were cracking, and blood began to pool beneath him. He tried to reach for his rifle, but it was out of reach, discarded in the dirt. His fingers scraped across the ground, desperately searching for anything to defend himself. The bear's jaws snapped shut, just inches from Matt's neck, and its claws dug deeper into his torso. He felt a hot, burning pain as the bear's claws raked through his flesh, leaving deep gashes that seemed to open with every violent movement. His vision blurred, the sharp pain in his chest almost overwhelming. His lungs burned with each shallow breath, and he could feel the blood oozing from his wounds. In a final frantic effort, Matt managed to grab the rifle strap with his left hand. He yanked it toward him, dragging the weapon closer. His fingers were slick with blood, his strength fading as the bear continued to maul him. With the rifle finally within reach, Matt knew he had one chance, but his hands were unsteady, his grip weak from the pain and blood loss. He raised the rifle, but before he could aim, the bear lunged forward again, its weight crushing him further into the earth. The barrel of the rifle snapped against the ground with the impact, and Matt felt his arm crack under the pressure. The bear was relentless, but Matt's will to survive was stronger. In one last desperate attempt, he shoved the rifle toward the bear's face, hoping the noise or the threat of a shot would drive it away. And then, miraculously, the animal pulled back, seemingly satisfied with the damage it had inflicted. It left Matt battered and bloodied on the ground. His breaths were ragged, each inhale a struggle. He knew he didn't have much time before shock set in. Matt had been in life or death situations before, but this was different. His blood pooled beneath him, and the cold of the Alaskan wilderness began to seep into his bones. Using every ounce of strength he had left, Matt began to crawl toward the nearest shelter. His body was broken, but survival instincts kicked in. He knew there was a cabin nearby, a small, abandoned hunting cabin where he might find shelter and call for help. His movements were slow and deliberate, each inch a monumental effort. The cold ground pressed against his broken body as he pulled himself forward, his muscles burning with the effort. It felt like an eternity, but finally, Matt reached the cabin. He used the last of his strength to pull himself inside, slamming the door shut behind him. His hands fumbled with the phone as he dialed the emergency services number. He knew it would take time for help to arrive, but he had done everything he could. When the rescue team arrived hours later, they found Matt barely conscious, his body covered in blood and his breathing shallow. They quickly loaded him into a helicopter and rushed him to the nearest hospital. Matt survived the ordeal, but the injuries were severe. Multiple deep gashes, broken ribs, and internal injuries left him scarred both physically and emotionally. He would never forget the bear's eyes, the power of its charge, or the brutal fight for survival in the heart of Kodiak Island. In the end, Matt was one of the lucky ones. In the remote mountains of Hokkaido, Japan, an elderly couple, Keiko and Hiroshi, ventured out on a hike they had been planning for months. At 68, Hiroshi had always loved the beauty of the wilderness, and Keiko, at 66, was no stranger to the trails, though she had slowed down in recent years. Together, they enjoyed the crisp air, the bright blue sky, the rustle of leaves, and the occasional bird call interrupting the silence as they made their way along the narrow trail. The couple had been hiking for several hours, their pace steady, with the distant sound of a stream accompanying them. They knew that this region of Hokkaido was home to brown bears, but attacks were rare. And they had taken all the usual precautions, carrying bear bells and making noise as they hiked. As they rounded a bend in the trail, the peaceful atmosphere was shattered by the sudden, terrifying sound of heavy movement from the underbrush ahead. Without warning, a large brown bear emerged into the clearing. The bear's eyes were wild with a mixture of fear and hunger. The sight of it was overwhelming, and Hiroshi froze in place, his heart racing. Keiko, too, stood still, her eyes wide in shock, but she felt a surge of panic wash over her as she realized how quickly the bear had appeared. She feared there was no time to escape. The bear, likely startled by their presence, wasted no time. With a deep, guttural growl, it charged at Hiroshi, its massive body moving faster than either of them could comprehend. Hiroshi barely had a chance to react before the bear struck. He was knocked to the ground with terrifying force, his body crashing into the dirt as the bear's claws raked down his side. Pain shot through his body like fire, but it was the fear, the raw, paralyzing terror that overtook him. His mind raced, but his body could hardly move. Keiko screamed in horror, her heart stopping for a moment as she saw the bear on top of her husband. She tried to move toward him, to pull him away, but the bear's size and strength were overwhelming. It was clear that it was focused on Hiroshi, but the wildness of the animal's attack seemed to extend in all directions. Keiko, despite her instinct to protect him, was helpless. She lunged forward, reaching for her husband, But as she did, the bear swiped its massive paw at her, sending her tumbling backward. The sheer force of the strike took her breath away, and she fell hard to the ground, her vision blurred with pain. The bear, its hunger and aggression unrelenting, turned its attention back to Hiroshi, who was trying to crawl away, his hands digging into the earth in desperation. Blood was already staining his clothes, and his side felt as if it had been torn open. But the bear didn't relent. It lunged again, its powerful jaws closing around Hiroshi's leg. He screamed, a sound that echoed through the forest. But it was drowned out by the bear's deep growls and the ferocity of the attack. Keiko, still dazed from the blow she had received, scrambled to her feet despite the sharp pain coursing through her body. She reached out once more, trying to get to Hiroshi, but the bear was too focused on him, its claws scraping across the dirt as it dragged him further into the brush. She saw Hiroshi's face contort with agony, and the desperation in his eyes fueled her actions. With no other choice, Keiko charged at the bear, throwing herself between it and her husband. The bear paused, momentarily confused by the woman's sudden movement. Keiko's hands found purchase on its thick fur, but it was as if she were pushing against a wall of solid muscle. The bear snarled, its hot breath washing over her, and she felt its sharp claws rake down her arm. The pain was blinding, but Keiko pushed forward, hoping to distract the bear, to give Hiroshi a chance to get away. She could see the blood flowing from his wounds, but there was nothing she could do. She was powerless against the creature's raw strength. It was at that moment that a distant voice reached their ears, faint at first, then louder as it drew nearer. The sound of human voices. A group of hikers who had been further up the trail heard the chaos and rushed toward the noise. The bear, sensing new threats, turned away from Keiko and Hiroshi, its focus shifting. The hikers, seeing the severity of the situation, did not hesitate. They pulled out bear deterrents, bear spray and loud noisemakers, and began to make as much noise as possible. The bear, startled by the loud sounds and the unfamiliar scent of the deterrents, hesitated for a moment. It let out a final defiant growl before retreating into the trees, disappearing as quickly as it had come. The hikers rushed to Keiko and Hiroshi, their presence a sudden comfort after the overwhelming terror of the attack. Keiko, her body trembling with shock and pain, fell to her knees beside her husband. Blood soaked her clothes, and the injuries to both of them were severe. Hiroshi's face was pale, and his breathing was labored. But he was alive. Keiko, too, was injured, but her determination to survive, to hold on for her husband, kept her conscious despite the pain. The hikers immediately called for emergency help. Within minutes, the sound of sirens could be heard in the distance, and soon a rescue team arrived. They quickly assessed the injuries, and with the hikers' help, carefully loaded Keiko and Hiroshi onto stretchers, taking them to waiting helicopters that would airlift them to the nearest hospital. The couple was rushed into surgery, and while their injuries were severe, deep gashes and broken bones, they both survived the attack. Hiroshi's leg was badly torn, and Keiko's arm was fractured, but neither of them would suffer permanent, life-threatening damage. The trauma of the attack, however, left its mark on them. They would never forget the sheer terror of that moment in the forest, nor the feeling of helplessness as the bear ravaged their bodies. For Keiko and Hiroshi, their love for the wilderness had not diminished, but it had become forever intertwined with the raw reminder of nature's untamed power.